Thank you very much. I have a presentation. Okay, so I will show you this one. I think I have around 20 minutes and we'll have questions perhaps at the end. So I would like to start right. Well, dear friends, dear ladies, gentlemen, it is a very exciting moment for me because I've been waiting for this I think 3 years has been since the first project ideas came about and since we have started discussing the possibility of how we could address this issue. And it became a project and now you know this is the final deliverable in this project. So there has already been 2 prior deliverables. And I would say this is the summary of all the hundreds of hours of work that many colleagues at CCB and DLF have worked with. So I'm really honored to present you this guide, and I was really honored to work with so many smart colleagues, and contribution of them was really critical in having a guide we are presenting today. Unfortunately, the timing was not the best outside our influence, but we planned to have like 6 meetings in person, and actually we could only have 2, but at least we were all the more grateful to be together during those 2 meetings. And you can see the project website, which is now live. And on this project website, ai4lawyers.eu, you can find not only this guide, but the previous deliverables, and there is also bonus content on document generation, so most exciting subject, but that is, I think, also something which gives some more depth to this. Because today I will not be able to present you, of course, everything that's interesting in the guide, and this is not really the place for giving technical discussions. But I would still try to give you an overview of how this guide works. So as I have mentioned, the AI for Lawyers project itself took 24 months. And this joint work has been final. This is the final day of the project. And these are the 2 deliverables. The covering is quite similar, as you can see, for the previous 2 reports. But I can say the content is not the same. So it is really worth reading also. Then the first report was about seeing what is the state of the art at that given time in 2020. The second is more technical discussion about natural language processing tools, and this is about guide. We could build up on lots of work that CCB has done in the past. So CCB has been dealing with technical subjects, how technical subjects affect lawyers' work since decades. In the last couple of years, there has been published a number of studies, guides, considerations, and we could also rely on these to make this guide. Actually, regarding the guide itself, our objective was to help lawyers find the opportunities and to understand these tools. To be able to use these tools, I would say it's not enough for lawyers just to give some technical explanations for this, which is difficult in itself. But it was also imperative from the start to say that lawyers should use these tools in a way which will not undermine professional obligations. So it's not about just using the tools properly, it's about using the tools in a way where we can remain lawyers as good as we can. So not to change the profession's core values, which is very much the same across all the different jurisdictions in Europe. So at the end, we wanted to have an easy-to-read guide, which is also still detailed enough. So it's not just about generics. I cannot enter now into the technical details too much. I will just provide a glimpse into it. But hopefully it's at the same time easy to understand for less technical people as well. So the lawyers have a job to respond to the changes in society, and I don't think we have to argue how much our society changes due to the digitalization, like we have much more evidence that is digital in nature. We have to rely on those evidence, digital evidence, and everything of our life is recorded in digital data. So not only the courts have to process this, but also lawyers have to anticipate this and use this kind of digital data. And I would say, yeah, we have to understand these changes. We have to embrace these changes and adopt our profession to it, adopt our practice, our daily practice to it. And AI tools are an important part of this transformative change. They enable this change in the society. They speed up digitalization of our society. And from our point of view, AI tools are not really about taking work from lawyers. It's more about providing more opportunities. The focus of the guide was mainly on smaller law firms. And the reason for this is that, of course, larger law firms are also affected by AI tools, but they do have their own expertise. They have own experts who then may be able to finance and who they can ask. And it's very different how you face these challenges when you have a small law firm with like your own staff only or just 10 employees, and how you approach this when you work in a law firm of, which is relatively rare now in the EU, but more than 250 lawyers is rare, but still an important part of the profession. So we thought it's a good idea to focus on the specific problems of smaller law firms, and also you can find many guides about how AI tools work, how you can understand those tools, but we wanted to make it the profession-specific guide. It seems the icons are not really working here, but forgive me for that. So it's this guide is not product-centered. It cannot really be. The market is very much fragmented in legal tech area in what kind of tools lawyers may use. But at the same time, what you may use in one country, you cannot really use that in another country. It's not possible to do that. So that's why we didn't really want to focus on providing day-to-day examples, very practical examples of how to use one particular tool or another. We wanted to focus more on didactic approach. I mean, how to explain to lawyers these techniques, how they work. Lawyers also have to have some kind of understanding, even if it's just very superficial. They have to be able to rely on their own understanding and their own intelligence and which cases they could be using these firms. And if you want lawyers to be able to find out the professional problems, the challenges that they may result in using these tools, lawyers have to be able to get some technical understanding of these tools and how these tools may develop in the future, how they may change. So let me just quickly mention 3 technological terms that we have used in the tool. This is not, of course, not the detailed explanation, but at least we have to describe here artificial intelligence. How did we understand it in the guide? Because there are so many explanations of this. It was deemed necessary to give you our understanding. In this approach, in our approach, AI was more about the objective of the tools, like are they planning to imitate some human capabilities which we consider usually as something that only a human can do, or an agent software which is interacting with its environment. And of course, we have to be reminded that AI as a term has been abused just to sell products to people. So that's why also it's important to have our understanding. And at the same time, machine learning is more like a technical way of operation. How the tools work, how the parameters of the procedure that the tool is doing and automating, how do they change? At least we would like the tools to improve by each and every previous example of use. Of course, that's not how it works in practice, but that's more about machine learning, and there are tools which fall into one or other categories, but not necessarily both. The other subject is about, the term is natural language processing. We lawyers work with the language, and we know very well the multiple meanings of the sentences, the different interpretations we have, and sometimes we do try to flex the meaning of the terms in a way which suits our interpretation better. That's a normal part of our work. That's not just be a passive user of language, but also to change the language, the meaning of the words. And computational linguists and other computer scientists can also focus on the use of language. They also focus on this, but their approach is how to automate this use of language, and that's really what natural language processing is about. There are very different areas of research in NLP. Actually, I wanted to give just a short overview of this, like how does human understanding work and how can we automate that kind of understanding? Like how can we find out automatically from a text in what language that is written? How can we find out the meaning of a specific word, because words usually have different meanings based on context? How can we find out what the context is? This part is about natural language understanding, and of course there is also another branch of natural language processing which is about language generation. If we have a verb, a noun, and an actor, how can we create a sentence, a naturally sounding sentence from that one? How do we automate a precise language generation? Also, can we imitate human voices by machines is also in this area, but that was not really subject of our research, of our guide. So this is all about natural language processing, and the techniques are very different here from symbolic extraction symbols from the text to statistical based solutions based on even at the subword level of the text of corpus. So let me highlight you 3 different parts from the guide. It's not the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it will be about the technical, the fun, and the difficult part. So the first one, the technical theme, is about the categories of AI tools, which we have used here. Of course, it's arbitrary, how you categorize a number of tools. You don't have a specific list of tools which you can categorize itself, but it was necessary to explain to lawyers better a wider scope of the tools that are available today. And we use this kind of categorization here. My personal favorite was the drafting support tools. This includes tools which help you within your own traditional word processing tools, from style checking, grammar checking is also in this category, but you can also use this as repositories of text, how to smartly reuse previous text of precedents, of previous legal provisions that you have used. But also another area is document assembly that we have discussed in more detail in this guide and also in the bonus material that I have mentioned. Like how can we create as many code documents or as many contracts as possible And it's not really the speed that matters mostly, but it's like how to be sure that you are using the text that you have used previously, how to be very consequent in your use of language. That's why these tools are really important. The document analysis category of tools was used to explain a bit in practice for lawyers how document analysis works. How can we categorize, classify certain provisions or even documents? How can we use information extraction tools, that mean tools that will highlight in your text the different persons, different entities involved, different organizations or places, and how these two different kinds of tools can be chained together, multiple steps, to provide very detailed document analysis as an output from due diligence purposes to other areas of use of document analysis that, from highlighting in the contracts problematic points, that these are all discussed under document analysis. And of course, one of the most important areas of AI tools, this has already been mentioned in previous presentations, in previous discussions as well, is about legal research. How can we ensure, and how did the scope, how did the focus of research, legal research, change with time? First, we had only the text-based research where, finding the keywords. That was sufficiently advanced also for the time, but with time there were more and more text that we could be looking at. We had to search through, and that's when the focus has changed from searching keywords to semantic search, to relevancy. How can we ensure that the most relevant results are presented to us only? And that's also something that builds upon many different tools of AI tools. Argument mining is also a very interesting area, which is a bit, it has been subject of research for decades, but it's still not practically used by lawyers in many areas. Still, it's an interesting subject because it could transform the way we draft, we argue, and we do legal research as well. And that's also part of the discussion of text retrieval and case law analysis. In case law analysis, we mentioned the Conseil National des Barreaux' 3 levels of analytic tools: informative tools and analytical tools, predictive, or as they call simulative tools. We try to explain why this approach is relevant and interesting for everyone else. Of course, we also discuss speech-to-text tools, like what is the place of improvement in speech-to-text. Everyone can still have it in their own telephone, to convert spoken text into spoken language into text, but there are still areas to improve there, and which would make it even easier for lawyers to use speeches in their everyday work, not just the good old dictation. Chatbots were also a very interesting subject and chapter, because chatbot is especially about client-facing techniques, and that's not really interesting from the technical point of view, but from the view that many lawyers who would like to extend their reach have to use sooner or later chatbots. If we take a look at the main increases in the number of users in computer tools in the last 5 years, we can see that now it's not really about social media that has increased in use, but more about it's more about messaging, different messaging services, and quite often we can still hear about new messaging services that where they expect lawyers to be present, and like the metaverse kind of approach where multiple virtual worlds are there for the lawyers for the taking. They would also expect the lawyers to have some presence, and it's not possible to have human presence in these places. So if lawyers want to extend their reach into and find new and new users, new and new clients via these tools, they have to use some way chatbots. But this is a very problematic area on the other hand, because there are many deontological issues here. And with regard to other assistants in AI tools, I would just like to highlight it's not only about filing and making filing of documents easier for lawyers, but it's also we have to be aware that many of the time tracking tools that we are using as lawyers are relying on artificial intelligence, and unfortunately the natural consequence of using these time tracking tools is that many lawyers do not even recognize that they record themselves, they track themselves or their colleagues. So you can very easily find some new innovative tools. If you go into the details, you will see that they make like a screenshot every 5 minutes, and it's important to know that these kind of recordings are done, because if you are doing that and record screenshots of your work and that's uploaded to a third-party provider, that can be very dangerous, and many lawyers do not really necessarily recognize this kind of threat and risk. So the fun part. The fun part was about scenarios. It was a very good suggestion of colleagues that we should include scenarios that describe in everyday terms how lawyers will in a future undefined time frame use these tools. This is, if you are not really feeling very technical, I suggest you to read this part. It was exciting for me, just a lawyer being used to write dull things, to be a little bit of a skiffy writer, at least for a couple of days. Of course, this is not about science fiction. This is more about the tools that are already there, that are already working in research projects. So this is not like maybe they will work, maybe they will not. These work in research subjects, but of course we cannot say if they will be good market opportunities or not. Sometimes there are missing data for these tools in a given jurisdiction, or they may not have the financial incentive for the developers to go there and do those kind of tools. The 5 different scenarios were presented. One was about contract negotiations on a platform for a client. We didn't really just try to show that there are tools that do this. We wanted to show it in how a day or 2 days of a hypothetical lawyer is doing this, and how does she use these tools, because that's the lawyer in the scenarios. Another one is about client intake. How does automated client intake work with these tools? Document assembly, of course, is a third scenario. And the next one is also an interesting one about court submissions. How can we automate that kind of area? Maybe that's the most uncertain, whether those things will work in practice. And the last one was introduced just to give colleagues an example of even if smart contracts are software, just the name is not really very expressive, lawyers might still be involved in reviewing, in the legal review of these smart contracts, but it shows just how different that is. It's not really about, it's probably will never be work for many lawyers, but just the scenario gives you an example of how this could work and what kind of situation that could work in the future. And now I will just very shortly mention the most difficult part to sort out about the professional obligations. But actually, there are here also a number of risk areas, high-risk areas. Cloud computing is an issue that we are discussing even today in CCB, and we'll be discussing for, I think, years to come. But we had to mention here, the problems of vendor lock-in, the problems of extraterritoriality, and the losing access to data, and the Data Act that we have just discussed today is also relevant here because of, how can lawyers switch providers as well. That's the same kind of problem that the Commission is trying to address for the general population. That's also something which is within in this guide. It just shows, it's important for us to identify these issues so that we can also feed back into the legislative processes at the European level, that these things really affect our life as well as lawyers. I think another very important part was about the lack of proper understanding and what really different meaning you have about explainability as a technical terms. So there are lots of research of computer scientists doing research on explainability, but that's not something of an explainability that we lawyers usually understand under how this thing is explained. Of course, privacy is also an important area that we had to discuss, and I wanted to say that one of the third major area was competence of lawyers and how this affects AI tools, what lawyers are expected to do and also not expected to do in relation to these tools. So thank you. I would just like to sum it up. Our lives have become very much unpredictable since the start of this project. So we all know that it's not only the pandemic that has claimed so many millions of lives, it's not only the war of this year. People still want predictability and crave for this predictability. And perhaps AI is popular in part because of the promise of this predictability. People would really want some tools to help them with achieving this predictability. Of course, we also have to be aware and we have to highlight that it's not really the best approach for justice to be 100% predictable, because that's not already the justice that we are understanding currently as justice. So the AI tools may help us in many aspects, but not in revealing justice, not in predicting justice. And still we have to know how to use these tools. We have to understand the limits of these tools, and that's why I would like to ask for your help in convincing lawyers to invest their time and efforts in using these tools, because that's the only way that we can understand these tools better. And it's not like we can rely on legal tech experts or big tech firms to do this kind of thinking for us. We have to use it ourselves. The small lawyers form the majority part of our profession, have to use these tools. So please kindly disseminate this guide, at least try to convince lawyers to use these tools. Thank you.